When Gareth Edwards reinvented Godzilla, I don't quite think he realized that his reinvention of the Toho classic would become arguably the most complex iteration of the character, other than potentially Heisei. His early MonsterVerse portrayals are largely the reason I think that what makes a good Godzilla is almost exactly the same thing as what makes a good Kirby. Both of them being these all-powerful bystanders who just are on their own doing their own thing. When the bad guy shows up and either intentionally or unintentionally pisses him off, he goes on an absolutely face-stomping carnage rampage, all the while being nigh unstoppable juggernauts. They are both absolutely likable, eldritch horrors that never once need to say a single word to get their feelings towards the audience across. Surprisingly, there is a lot of lore and story within Kirby, very little of which is actually told outright and needs to be figured out from context clues, but while the story itself is rather simple, it does exist and it's rather effective. And the reason I say early MonsterVerse is that while Gareth Edwards and Michael Dougherty did deliver two absolutely spectacular portrayals of Godzilla, the later Wingard duology did, well, let's just say a great deal of damage to this, which is why this video is actually going to be part one of a two-part series. The reason I bring up this quote from Wingard is that this is more or less him, all the way back then, admitting that he wanted to make Godzilla far more antagonistic. It's all the more infuriating considering that he does actually understand what went into making the more heroic Godzilla that the MonsterVerse had portrayed prior. It was simply, he didn't want to do it. He wanted to go with his own direction of Godzilla, and that actively caused quite a great degree of detriment. It meant that when elements of Godzilla which were present before show up later in his movies, it feels almost out of character and, if anything, becomes contradictory to the prior established elements of the character. Something that would degrade and devolve Godzilla into nothing more than a grumpy bully. As this is about the character of MonsterVerse Godzilla, and Wingard's changes to Godzilla were both very deliberate and very drastic, to the point that it largely conflicts with his characterization in the early MonsterVerse. The guy can make beautiful fight scenes, but story, keep the guy away from Godzilla. And maybe even those fight scenes too, because they'll probably end up giving Kong the spotlight more than anything. Hello everyone, I'm Max Allo, your American Allosaurus. And with the ever-growing speculation of Godzilla Kong Supernova, the news of Godzilla -1's sequel being filming underway and possibly filmed and set in America, I thought it was a good idea to really kind of revisit the origin of the modern Godzilla craze and really look at just, unfortunately, what happened to MonsterVerse Godzilla. If you enjoy the kind of gaiju content we do around here, we are planning on more videos of course, different series. And we're always happy to hear what you guys like to recommend for videos in the comments below. While you're down there, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more. For all of the assorted problems of Godzilla 2014, namely the constant cutaways from some of the action, Gareth Edwards absolutely nailed his reinvention of Godzilla. Not only his entirely drastic different origin story, completely differentiating him from whatever came before, and making him a much more ambiguous character, whereas in the past, Toho's was always a nuked organism created by humanity's mistakes, thus naturally putting him on much less positive footing with humanity, MonsterVerse Goji being a natural part of Earth's environment, by default would set him as a much more ambiguous and neutral character, capable of swinging from good to evil just simply by our perception, without getting into any motivations of himself. simply what we perceive him to be, and going back to the idea that Godzilla does exist above morality. That, compared with his absolutely colossal new size, paints him as almost an indifferent god and walking force of nature at the same time. Something that at first glance would appear so beyond and above humanity. However, there is a lot more depth to the character than just that. The best of this actually being handled in story by the speculation of his motives, with very little in the way of actual confirmation being given from the characters. With the presence of the Muto spores originally being from within Dagon's body, resulting in his death, this potentially paints the picture of Godzilla's hunting them down as some sort of avenging his own kind's slaying, pursuing that which claimed the member of his species' bloodline. However, it is also suggested that he is simply something of an apex predator hunting down his prey. This being put forward by Dr. Serizawa, who is portrayed as something of the Godzilla expert within the movies, lends a little bit more credence to this, but even in the movie, this is not shown to be a definitive statement. It's shown to be simply speculation. He also shows a near non-reaction to any of what humanity, and more specifically the military, throws at him. While the Muto, on the other hand, actively attack humanity, especially in regards to when they fire upon them in retaliation. Once again, this gives this air of separation and ambiguity. If it weren't for the several scenes of Godzilla being shown to be hit by naval fire, as well as actively avoiding retaliating against humanity after we nuked him 60 years ago. A direct strike hitting him right in his gills at what is a known weak point at the Golden Gate Bridge, and he just simply moves forward like nothing happened. It was a very subtle indication of what Godzilla's true alignment was, that he was very firmly on the side of good, and more specifically on the side of humanity, and wasn't simply a mindless destroyer and a simple animal, but was done in such a way that it's very easy to overlook and leaves the door open to any possible future expansion one way or another, being that humanity is just simply so insignificant he just didn't take notice and wasn't worth his time, or, as we now know they continued on later, showing that he is firmly on the side of humanity and he didn't retaliate because he was pretty much trying to protect them. The end of the movie even somewhat alludes to this, with the implication being humanity is thankful to Godzilla because we directly benefited from his actions without understanding what his motives were. He simply showed up, defeated two monsters, leveling a city in the process, but then simply just returned it to the ocean. While I will never be shy of my criticisms of Michael Dougherty's King of the Monsters, I will give him credit for his follow-up to Godzilla 2014 was near perfect in his execution of Godzilla. It retains 2014's personality and simply expands upon it. It does clear up much of his ambiguity and firmly establishes that he has always been on humanity's side, hence the Kirby analogy at the start of the video. His protectiveness is not just a territorial claim he's defending from King Ghidorah. It is a genuine fondness and care for humanity. A large part of this being that his past humans, which venerated and worshipped him, fighting and dying in his name against creatures like King Ghidorah. Yes, these were humans that would try to fight eldritch space horrors like Ghidorah with nothing but spears. Even though they were destroyed, Godzilla would feel the weight of their death and carried that with him through the rest of time. This is why he looks so fondly upon Dr. Serizawa. He is fully able to understand the weight and the meaning behind his sacrifice. It's also why he's able to comprehend the humans in the sub are allies of Dr. Serizawa and as such, allies of him. This coming off of the fact that humanity tried, and most importantly failed, to kill Godzilla with the Oxygen Destroyer. giving him a completely justifiable reason to want to wipe out humanity, yet he doesn't. This extends beyond simply just humans, going so far as to other kaiju. Largely Mothra, he reacts with sadness and rage when she sacrifices herself to protect him from Ghidorah, and part of his destruction of Ghidorah is in vengeance for his fallen friend. Most fans like to meme that they are a couple, but it is far more in the line of she is the right hand of Godzilla. She is basically his second in command and a very close friend. Someone who has been with Godzilla through a great many battles, something of which I would love to see expanded upon in future stories if they get someone who knows how to do Godzilla right again. Pair this up with the end of the film, which establishes him as a very merciful king, opting to spare Rodan. Keeping in mind, Rodan had just helped King Ghidorah try to overthrow and kill Godzilla, and resulted in the death of Mothra. He had every right to turn him into extra spicy Dino Chimkum Nuggies. This points far more to his isolation and the fact that he is simply seeking companionship. He is shown much later to very much miss Mothra, and later allies with his species' arch nemesis Kong, making him almost a bit like Naruto in his preference for converting former enemies into allies rather than just kill them. Despite the fact that Godzilla vs. Kong was a movie directed by Adam Wingard, with Wingard's much more heel Godzilla mentality taking root, this aspect of Godzilla being shown a somewhat more compassionate side is due to Michael Dougherty being a co-writer of the movie. He was still able to keep one hand on the wheel before Wingard completely took over for GXK, which is why the next video we cover this in will be more on that segment of the story, but still including Godzilla vs. Kong as well. Despite many issues I do have with KOTM, and particularly Michael Dougherty's writing of it, I have no issues with how he portrayed Godzilla. He very much understood the assignment and delivered, establishing Godzilla as this bringer of balance to the Earth in this series. A role that is really not that different to the Avatar from the Avatar: The Last Airbender series. A physical god whose function is to preserve the order. Something that, amusingly, gave Godzilla the complete 100% moral justification to have flatlined Kong. It was extremely well done, and perhaps that is the reason this was my favorite interpretation of the character. At the same time, it's also abundantly clear that just because he's a bruiser with a soft center, he is by no means just a big softy. His intimidation display of humanity, specifically Monarch, prior to Ghidorah's resurrection by Emma, his rampage when Apex Cybernetics was more or less trolling him constantly for years, show that despite how much he prizes his companionship with humanity, there are limits to it. As well as his mercy shown to other kaiju is conditional. He gives a very non-verbal threat to Rodan, making it clear to the KFP reject he is on beyond thin ice. And prior to the deal being retconned, at the end of Godzilla vs. Kong, the agreement between the two was Godzilla will spare Kong so long as he doesn't disobey Godzilla, firmly establishing himself as the senior partner in this agreement. He also displays quite a few Blood Knight tendencies. A genuine joy he has for combat. Not to say that he is actively thirsting for violence, as he was much later Flanderized into being by Wingard, but more something along the lines of he would rather settle things peacefully. If it does come to blows, he won't feel bad, as well as he will actively hold back in a fight if he believes the opponent can be turned to being an ally. This is something of what makes Adam Wingard's treatment of Godzilla far more infuriating. He actively knew and understood how to carry on the MonsterVerse version of Godzilla. He just actively did not want to. He wanted to make Godzilla into basically the heel of the series, whereas before he was the face. He was the good guy. He knew to turn him into being a more antagonistic force, it would have taken time. He couldn't just do it at the drop of a hat. And while there are still shades of pre-King of the Monsters, or rather pre-Wingard Godzilla, showing up in the Wingard duology, when it shows up, it's actually more an out-of-character moment than anything else. Something that we are, again, going to be going into greater detail on the Wingard portion of the MonsterVerse. As much as I do love the MonsterVerse, it's also very hard to come to grips with a lot of the conflicting feelings I get the longer I hold on to things. Some of the fight scenes, especially in the Wingard Saga, were absolutely spectacular, but at the same time, they did come at the cost of a very deliberate attempt to subvert and be subversive of Godzilla for the sake of putting Kong on a heightened pedestal. I do hope with Godzilla Kong Supernova, this is reversed. We get to see a more heroic Godzilla once again. Perhaps even an in-story acknowledgement of Godzilla actually wasn't being evil the whole time, it was just humanity not knowing what we were doing and unintentionally pissing him off. Because in reality, we kind of were. But really, I just hope with Supernova we get a well-handled Godzilla going forward. Again, this is a part 1 to a 2-part saga. We're going to be going more into the Wingard stuff at a later point. If you guys enjoy what you see, or rather heard, don't forget to subscribe for more, comment your thoughts below if you disagreed with me, and I will see you guys next time. Long live the Kaiju King.